Good morning. This is Lori Schmidt, the Wolf Curator. We would like to welcome you to the Friday update of the pack, and we have this opportunity here to answer any questions that people might have. And just as a reminder that we do have a Q&A, so you can type in questions. It works better than the raising the hand. So if you type in questions and I can answer them for you. So on screen right now, we have Axel in the front. He is an Arctic subspecies. And then on the top of the pump housing, we call this a pump housing because that is where the UV filter system sits for the filtering the water in the pond. So underneath this big pile of rock, well, now pile of ice and hay and snow, is a submersible pump that pumps the water up through a line to the upper pond, and it runs through a series of two actually long UV filters. And you may be a little bit more aware about UV as becomes more and more commonly used in places to eliminate germs and the I guess the exposure to UV light for algae is cleans it, and that's how we kind of keep our pond maintained. But obviously, those are things that we do not want in our wolf exhibit and or our wolves, having access to it. So that's why the big pile. It's a concrete block that had been poured, and it has a metal roof on it that has a door that we can access into the pump system, and then rocks around it for stability of the concrete. So that's where Denali on the left, he is our northwestern subspecies, and Bolts on the right, he is our Minnesota subspecies. So there's a question, um, did a roof avalanche cover Gryzor's den? Yes, we had an avalanche about 7:30 last night. Gryzor was sleeping in um, the transition area, and so he had a kind of a situation where we had some metal, I guess, angle iron up on top of that roof to try to keep that roof from sliding to either side of the den. And actually, last night in that snow, it took off one of the pieces of the angle iron. So we're gonna have to fab that and relook at that. But snow slides are kind of common. We do work with taking snow out of the exhibit on a regular basis, but in the back habitats and basically those smaller kind of working areas where it's difficult to get a skid steer in, it's all done kind of manually. So those are something that the wolf care staff on a regular basis. This is why even in this COVID scenario, and as Minnesota goes into a stay at home, we will still have core wolf care staff who are here monitoring the wolves, monitoring the facility. So Krista, Kelly, Leanne, and I will continue to work throughout this circumstance of a stay-at-home order here in Minnesota. So a couple of different things. I think I want to get to Tony's. Had a question, is there any evidence of hybridization in fossils of gray wolves and dire wolves? Tony, I'm going to get you to that. I'm going to get you some resources for that offline here. I guess I want to just make sure that I identify some of the questions about our pack here first. But I do want to share, before we kind of go there, I'm going to share a couple of things, and then I'll get back to the pack since they're just kind of hanging out. First of all, one of the things that Tony's asking about is hybridization on skulls. I wanted to just address a couple of different things that have gone on in the wolf world that relate to morphology. And morphology, again, is this study of skeletal structures and diameter, let's say skeletal measurements, length of bones, body size, that type of thing. Dentition formula plays a key role in identifying species. The dental formula in the canids is what we call a 33114423, meaning incisors, front teeth that they use to pull sinew or muscle, kind of like their fine-tuned working teeth are, again, when we go 3-3, upper, lower, left, right, meaning that the mandible, which is the jaw, is split, and so you got a left side, right side, and then you got upper, lower. Canines, again, 2 upper, 2 lower, premolars, 4 upper, 4 lower, molars, uh, 2 on the upper on either side and 3 on the lower. Total of 42 teeth is dentition formula. And I think we kind of addressed this last week, and I wanted to cover it. There's a couple of things I didn't do a stellar job on last week. One of them was, not being respectful to hyenas, um, who are predators and hunters, as well as wolves, and have a social dynamic that's a little bit different. I kind of just really emphasized scavenging with them. Again, I always want to make sure that people get the right resources available to them. But what I'm showing you right now on my screen, this is the original subspecies designations in North America. And this is pre 1995. So in other words, a lot of these subspecies designations were really done based on studies at that time, most of it based on morphology or the structure. And so you can see, and I think one of the questions somebody had asked is, was the wolf that was common in the Southern Rockies, is it extinct now? And again, extinction is different than extirpation. Extinction basically means the species no longer exists, has been eliminated, due to whatever particular reason. But extirpated means that it's removed from its original range. And so in the Southern Rockies, if we looked at, kind of that information, the original 24 subspecies in North America had that as nubulus subspecies, which we now call the Minnesota subspecies. And so in 95, getting to Tony's kind of question about knowledge about hybridization and things, that would be information that may be more surmised by genetics. And so what ended up happening in 1995, subspecies designations went from 24, as you can see this list here, of subspecies, and some of them named after biologists, actually. The Youngie, if you recognize some of the biology of some of the Northern Canadian Arctic. But here we are in today's subspecies naming. So again, the nomenclature taxonomy in North America to 5 subspecies, with the identification of the red wolf as a separate wolf, Canis rufus, than Canis lupus. So the subspecies of the gray wolf in North America would include the nubulus, which is this wolf right here, which is Minnesota, and having that extending down towards what we have the definitive line of the Mexican wolf down here is number 2. Now, number 3 is what's interesting, and the information about the eastern subspecies of the gray wolf, which in this taxonomy, again, Arctos, Arctic wolf, which we have here with Axel and Grayson, Canis lupus, the Mexican wolf, which is we saw down here, number 2, the Lycoan eastern subspecies, which is number 3, and then number 4, the nubulus, and number 5, occidentalis, which is Denali represents here for us, is that northwestern subspecies. So the most recent papers, I think this was a question about are dogs part of the wolf subspecies, meaning referencing that they were domesticated from wolves, Canis lupus familiaris, or are they Canis familiaris? Scientific papers show variable with that, and certainly it depends upon which study you read. As with any science, the more information, the more genetics we have, the more information that we have. So at this point, again, some camps call it Canis lupus familiaris, meaning domesticated from what they believe to be the gray wolf as an origin. Some people say no, it is a separate species because of uniqueness in its morphology. Certainly we know that dogs have different physiological things. Wolves breed once a year, dogs breed twice a year. Dogs can breed any time of the year. Wolves typically have a breeding pattern here in North America in the spring. So when I get into some of these questions, I always want to make sure people have sources. So the red wolf is one that has been discussed in previous years, whether it was hybridized with gray wolves and coyotes. Are they distinct? The National Academies of Science produced a paper, evaluated the taxonomy of the Mexican gray wolf and the red wolf, and I can share with you that National Academies Press publication. There's other publications where gray wolves and coyotes had no hybridization. Um, as far as the eastern wolf, the Canadian government right now um, seems to recognize the eastern wolf as a separate species and not a subspecies of the gray wolf. So again, it depends upon who you kind of talk about and who you reference as far as the scientific information. So to get back to Tony's question, has there been genetic indication that hybridization has occurred between, I believe his question was between the dire wolf, and let me get back to the Q&A, gray wolves and dire wolves. Again, I'm going to leave that to scientists, and I can find some information, about that to share. But let me just go back to one more thing before I get back to the pack. The pack's getting up right now because meds are being done here. But we do work with Dr. Dave Meach, who obviously is a founder of our board, who has obviously information access, personal research projects that gain information. And so we do rely on Dr. Meach's work. And there is an article here, again, specifically about Minnesota wolves and about the taxonomy of Minnesota wolves, something I'd like to share with people at the end of this presentation that talks about the origin of Minnesota wolves, what kind of research has shown as far as hybridization of coyotes within Minnesota wolves. And so I think I want to share that information with people and get to the point too that people understand the kind of the whole genetic naming taxonomy and what we kind of call the family tree of canids. And so when we break out the canid family, science always talks about the domain, the kingdom, the phylum, the class, order, family, genus, and species. And then we tend to talk a little bit about subspecies, although many people are saying that subspecies designations are probably not something that we're going to, that are as relevant as the genus species references. So anyways, so when we talk about certain things, again, the wild canids that we're referencing, you're looking at gray wolf characteristics, and certainly something that I think is important for us. This is Boltz and Luna here is referencing obviously coloration, but the main thing that we want to reference when we look at the morphology, the skeletal structure, or look at the body characteristics with gray wolves, obviously we see kind of the way the skeletal structure is designed. You see a little kind of dip in the skeletal structure. You see shorter ears than we do with some of the other canid species, so the ears are more cupped. And as we go back to the exhibit, I want you to even look at the difference between, Denali and Boltz and even the Arctics, different characteristics for them to live. One of the questions was, how are the different subspecies kind of adapted? Well, in the Arctic, you want less surface area exposed to colder climates, so your ears are going to be more cupped. They're going to have more hair, kind of more rounded, less veins to the surface, the less heat you lose. And so you're going to see that characteristic. Obviously, what we call the saddle of the wolf, changing coloration, that seems to be a pattern on the back saddle. And that obviously is a place where you typically see hackles. Hackle response is something that we look at when we talk about pack compatibility. Are there characteristics there that we, or patterns that we see? I mean, is a wolf showing its hackles, and this is kind of more of an adrenal response, a tension kind of issue. And hackles can actually be all the way from the mid neck all the way back to the rump, and actually we've even seen wolves in aggressive arousal with hackles all the way back to the base of their tail. So other things that we look at, like I said, is long bone growth, the height of the wolf, the skeletal structure. But the main thing that I kind of look at is the size of the paws. I get a lot of photos sent to me from people saying, hey, is this a coyote or is this a wolf? It was on my game cam. And chances are just a visual look at a photo may not be that easy. And especially here in Minnesota, where there's some discussion about whether wolves have been maybe, especially Minnesota and eastward, whether wolves have coyote DNA and what that means. But characteristically, gray wolves, oversized foot per leg ratio. And that's something that we kind of look at. Red wolves, again, unique. They are a genus species, Canis rufus, so they are not a subspecies of the gray wolf. They are a separate wolf, having, again, characteristics, maybe a little bit longer ears, being in a little bit warmer climate. You're going to want to, again, dissipate heat, a little bit smaller in body size. Notice their nose doesn't dip quite as much as the gray wolves, and I'm not doing them any service at all. We have people who from the Red Wolf Coalition who I will send reference material with the archive here that can share with you much more information about red wolves in the circumstances. And then the other question, again, last week somebody had asked, is the coyote characteristics. Notice coyotes have extremely, what I consider to be much longer ears, much narrower snout, much longer facial characteristics, smaller feet per leg ratio. And the other thing is size. Typical gray wolves in Minnesota can be about in that 55 to maybe 80 or 90 pound range. Coyotes in Minnesota, much smaller, meaning that coyotes that might be in that 30 to 40 pound range. Again, there's some variances in coyote size between the western coyote and eastern coyote. In the absence of wolves, there's even been some science, some research that has indicated the coyotes are, capable of packing up and maybe filling an ecological niche in the absence of wolves due to extirpation of wolves in the eastern part of the country. Coyotes even coming in a little bit bigger body size, but classic coyote here is, again, relatively small. I look at that foot, not nearly as large. As a matter of fact, a wolf pup foot size is going to be quite a bit larger than what we see even with an adult coyote. So just characteristics to look at. So when I look at somebody sends me a, blurry, dark, wild game cam photo and says, I think this is a wolf. First of all, there's no definitive way for me. I always say, go back and look at the track sizes. If they're usually under 3 inches in size, again, this time of the year in the middle of winter, it's likely a coyote, because wolf pups by 4 months of age have bigger feet than that. And so it's something I kind of always reference. So a smaller skeletal structure, tail postures can look a little bit different. When they move, again, maybe a little bit more solitary, but you can also find animals scavenging together. You can certainly see, evidence of that. And we always say scavengers come in groups. So here, because we are seeing the eagles, we have winter migrating eagles, or sorry, winter residents and then migratory eagles. The migratory eagles are coming back here in northern Minnesota, and we do see and hear evidence of eagles within, watching that coyote. And speaking about it, see evidence of eagles even within our enclosure. So what I'm going to do, I wanted to just make sure I reference that. Again, this is a typical game cam shot that somebody might send to somebody and say, is that a coyote? Is that a wolf? Yeah, my first take is that's coyote. And so that's something that we want to kind of look at. So getting back to our exhibit, like I said, wolf care staff will usually come in about 8:30 in the winter. We try to let them sleep in a little bit because the temperature is coldest here in Minnesota. Well, probably most places that have a northern climate, the temperature is coldest about a half an hour pre and even post sunrise. So, we want to make sure, especially on those 20, 30 below days, we let them stay bedded down where they are. We don't get them up until after the sun rises and the temperature warms up a bit. The difference between an 8 o'clock wolf check and a 10 o'clock wolf check can be 15 or 20 degrees in the middle of winter. So this right now is Grayson on the left and Axel on the right. We've been telling them apart a little bit by the differences on Axel has a little bit more almond-shaped eyes. His nose doesn't slope quite as much as Grayson. He's got a kind of a narrower nose pattern, so there's a little bit of longer pattern to that muzzle, whereas Grayson, you can see that a little bit more stout, broader head. When you look at him, he's got a little bit more of that definitive drop in that facial pattern. This camera does make noise, so you'll see them kind of look up when I move the camera a little bit. We certainly always want to make sure that the wolves are conditioned. When we first brought the camera in, they were kind of freaked out about it. So it took us a while to do this pan tilt zoom camera and make sure that, it was a circumstance where the pack, didn't get freaked out about it and had, pretty much the ability to manage without showing any kind of fear avoidance behavior. And then, like I say, even this morning, we are a little bit chilly. I'd say, I guess I didn't even check the weather this morning. We do weather checks here. It is currently 19 degrees here. And so it's a little bit crusty. And that's making the challenge over in the east side. There's Gryzor walking through what's called the pack holding area, this transition area. But Kelly and Leanne working pretty hard on the east side to break apart that snow. Gryzor's not bothered by it. As a matter of fact, I clipped the video to see, how he responded to that slide last night. And he was sleeping in the transition area, which is why we build the transition area so that they have that area out of the weather. And he just basically got up, went and looked at it, and didn't seem too bothered by it. So snow is something that we do. We remove snow and slide snow. We had a slide here that was a controlled slide, meaning that we took it off. This one back here was normally doesn't slide, but as you can see here, that is the protective bar that's supposed to protect the snow, and that's Kelly trying to chop it out of the ice there. So Gryzor was sleeping, like say, in the transition area, and that certainly is something that is big part of our task in wolf care is facility maintenance. So it is not as easy as, well, just throw the wolves a deer and go about your business. It's not that easy. We need to have staff here every day, multiple times a day, checking in on them. Obviously, cameras are a real benefit for us. So that is one of the things that I think is real important. The other thing I wanted to talk about is we did feed up, change the feeding schedule. We had been feeding smaller amounts Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then the What's for Dinner program on Saturday. Now that the center is closed to operation until May 1st, we will be feeding on Tuesdays and on Wednesdays and on Fridays. So we're reducing the feeding schedule. Again, wolves have a typically pattern of gorging. They like to gorge. Their stomachs have receptors that allow them to hold 20% of their body weight. So part of the psychological basis of wolves is that they have that ability to, again, feed. They can fill up, they can process that food and digest, and 2 or 3 days later, have another, or in our case, 4 days later, have another larger meal to process and digest. In the wild, the pattern of hunting might be, 7 to 10 days, depending upon availability of prey. Right now, this is a very challenging time for the prey species because of these warm days and cooler nights. This snow is crusting up, and it's like a sidewalk for predators, and it's not so easy for prey to be able to maneuver, especially for our white-tailed deer who are not truly native. I shouldn't say not truly native. There's evidence that deer were present, but this is typically caribou and moose range here in the north, and those caribou and moose are classic big hoofed animals who deal well with deep snow. White-tailed deer don't, and so white-tailed deer are having definitely a tough time this winter. It's been a slow melt. We still have several feet of snow in the woods. We still have several feet of snow in this enclosure before we ever see the ground again. So we have predicted rain for Saturday and Sunday, but also that rain could very well turn to snow. So don't be surprised if you watch the camera on Saturday or Sunday and you see 6 or 8 inches of snow in this exhibit. So I think I kind of followed up a question. Is there a subspecies difference towards winter cold temperature and snow? Again, if I look at the Arctics, they have a little bit more cupped ears. They're a little bit shorter. So again, when I look at them, I can't find them right now. Let me try not to pan the camera too fast to avoid any kind of challenges there. But yep, they're there. So when I look at the Arctics, you notice, again, it's just subtle, but they're a little bit shorter, a little bit stouter. These legs don't have as much surface area on dissipating heat. The ears are shorter, a little bit more cupped, versus Denali, our tallest wolf here, our biggest wolf here, our northwestern subspecies. Even though they're living in an area of the north, it does seem like they're a little bit more adapted to and maybe it's something in the Rocky Mountains, a little bit more larger in body size, that Alaskan northwestern subspecies, whereas the Minnesota wolf here, pretty middle range as far as body types. The Mexican wolf, which we do not have here, as far as the subspecies, we only have 3 out of the 5 North American subspecies here. But the Mexican wolf, you get a chance to look at any of the facilities that have Mexican wolves, you see fairly tall and fairly long-eared. Again, heat dissipates on the legs, so you have surface veins close to the surface area there. Heat dissipates on the ear, and I think that's probably some of the subspecies designations. And I think that's why a lot of biologists are saying, you know, subspecies don't mean as much because wolves are wolves. They have a lot of different physical traits that maybe benefit where they live. Maybe it's camouflage, maybe it's the way the body structure is, but the reality is they hunt, they socially engage, they behave similar no matter where they are, you know, even across the globe. So I think that hopefully that answers their questions. Do they lay all the time since the UV lights make the area warm? Actually, the UV lights are not running right now. The UV lights are only on when we have water flowing, which, even though we're a 4-season climate, theoretically, meaning that we have spring, summer, fall, and winter, we have frozen ground usually, or snow, or inability to flow water for about 8 months out of the year. So we will typically put that filter system back in when first of all, the water is 7 feet below the ground. Theoretically below the frost line is where we get the water feed from. And but the pipes pipe right across the top of the ground into this housing, we have had since late May before the pipes are thawed. And so we have to wait for that water line to be thawed. So June, July, August, we will have that water flowing with the UV filter system. And then by late August, we might be in a circumstance where we get a frost. We need to pull that out. So there's only 3 months where that UV filter system is running, and it does not appear to generate much heat. It's not like an incandescent light or some other kind of heat generating light. So the reason why they lay up there is obviously the cover hay is very, very important to them. In the wild, obviously, wolves don't have cover hay. In the wild, wolves are, you know, curling up in fresh snow. This is a compacted exhibit. This is obviously a lot of the insulation value of the snow has been lost by the traffic of the wolves. So we put the cover hay down to insulate from that ground. We look at how the wolves are lying down. Gryzor, sorry, Bolts is in a side rest here. So he's not, you know, obviously bothered at all by the fact that he's laying on an ice cube. Doesn't bother him at all. As a matter of fact, last week, and I think Keith sent me a screenshot of it. I'd hate to go to my email and open that up right now because we have probably 200 emails about the auction. But Keith sent me a great screenshot of all 4 of them. I zoomed in them on the camera. They were all 4 lying down, all spread out on their sides on the ice the other day when it got to be about 45 degrees. They do not care for warm weather in this time of the year because they've got their full winter coats. As a matter of fact, warmth is a problem for wolves probably more than cold is for us as far as the temperature. So the question is, how is Gryzor's health? He is doing well. Actually, Gryzor has no other medical treatments. He gets his vitamins. He gets some vitamin B. He gets some milk thistle. A few years ago, he had really high liver enzyme values. All right, it was low values. Oh, I can't remember. But there was something abnormal about his liver enzymes. I'd have to go back to the records. And so anyway, so our vets are very willing to look at nutritional supplements and have a circumstance where they might recommend something that's been in the literature that helps. I think it was low enzyme levels for his liver, and milk thistle was one of those treatments that seemed to help. And we did that treatment and then took another blood work, and it did. So he does not have any circumstance where he has any other supplemental medication. He just takes his morning vitamins. If you happen to log in before we went live here, he was having breakfast. He gets ground food. He doesn't chew as well. I think we already had a premolar pulled on his upper premolar, pulled on him maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. So he had a abscess on the premolar. I think he had another one this winter. We treated with antibiotics, but at this age, we're not gonna pull Gryzor for any medical treatment. At 16, the risk of anesthesia is much more problematic than it is to have that tooth have a little bit of abscess. Again, if we can treat it, and maybe we can alter some different types of antibiotics to make sure that we don't get a resistance to that antibiotic, that's kind of the course of action that we're going to try. Tony had asked, was Gryzor injured in the avalanche? Gryzor, no, Gryzor doesn't sleep in the east side den. One of the reasons why we built the area that we built, and again, a lot of the roof lines, you'll see these roof lines that are over the retired area that are not over the exhibit, is because we really have to protect those older wolves from snow, from ice. Gryzor had a ACL tear a few years ago when we didn't have any kind of protection from snow. So now he sleeps in, it's kind of like an indoor setting with doors on either side. So it's not like being indoors, which he panics about being locked in a building. Plus we don't want to lock him in a building and then you have a variance between heat and cold, and then, you know, affect his body. You know, these are outdoor animals and they stay outdoors, but having that protection from the snow and ice is real important. So I have the video clip. I'll share it with you when I do the archive. So I'm sure he heard it. He actually got up, went out and sniffed it, and then kind of went about his business. So the main thing that we want to do is make sure that he can travel. As a matter of fact, he is on the east side den right now with Leanne. They got it back to the point where he can walk through and travel. So that means we got to get the snow out of the way. They did a fabulous job of opening up that den. He actually does not go into that den at all. I don't think I've seen him since Luna passed using that den at all. So he climbs the top of the den, and that's where we put hay. And so his physical conditions are certainly a concern for us. That back right leg was his ACL tear. Just was not something that we really felt like, you know, and that was at 13, that we really felt like there was anything we could do. You know, again, ACLs are tough on a dog. The recommendations are no, you know, no restricted movement, you know, and you know, these are just challenging things for older wolves. So you can see there that hock is a little bit straighter, but he does manage. And so, like I said, he is on some joint supplements. He's on Dasaquin and also Durlactin. Durlactin's kind of a milk protein for joints, although his joints are in really good shape. And I think one of the questions somebody had asked me on Luna's webinar, which you may have been on or you may not have, was whether spaying and neutering has some detriments. And I think spaying and neutering early shows some indication that there is some change in the long bone growth about early spays and neuters. Gryzor was actually a spay or neuter at a year. So his conformation is really good. As a matter of fact, he's got great bone structure. And the other thing I noticed about him, you know, he's not putting on weight like Luna and Aiden did. So again, I don't know if there's, you know, anything about stress, about pack leaders and how they metabolize food differently, but he's got a lot of hair, but physically, when we get a handle on him, he's a very trim, muscular animal, even at the age of 16. So I think that's really important for us to kind of keep an eye on how he's developing. And like I said, you know, we do a lot of work here. Like, just can't reiterate enough the importance of reducing that snow load, reducing, you know, if you look at the exhibit pack and how much these guys have to deal with all this snow and ice and things, and they're relatively mobile. Even Denali, I worry about. He's 12, and having, you know, a risk of him slipping is huge, especially because other pack members here, you know, if you slip in retirement and you're the only one there, you know, it's kind of like, does a tree fall in the forest, doesn't make a noise. You know, the reality is when you're alone, you know, you're not as vulnerable by other pack members seeing that as weak. Denali has a greater risk in here because of he trips and falls, and the other, you know, members see that as a weakening, you know, especially if they look to him as being dominant. That's a concern. So we're going to keep an eye on that. The other day, he looked like he was having trouble getting up. Looks like the meds are going to happen out here for the exhibit. So I want to really make sure that, you know, that he's protected, and that's something that I want to keep an eye on. I'm not going to retire him until he's ready, because I use the parameter, you know, he's socially engaging, and he's so important to Bolts. If you happen to be on Luna's webinar on Wednesday night, we fed a deer, and Bolts has got some issues, primarily Axel. And you can see a little bit of that slow posturing, walking, the T2 tail, you know, just being a little bit of a, and there's a face off. We call that a tee off. Just blocks Bolts, and Bolts' confidence goes way down. So I need to keep Denali in here to keep Bolts confident. And you know, the reality is, I think I've said it before, I need a female in here to kind of settle everybody down. So let me get back to the questions on the exhibit, and I'll try to. It's kind of a little challenging here because I have questions up, and I'm going to try to pan and keep an eye on the exhibit here. So I keep them on camera. Again, just more posturing from Axel to Bolts. And Axel's just trying to prove his point that he's higher ranking. Bolts got up and looked a little too happy for Axel's sake. And there comes Grayson, much more timid. And Grayson, again, is responding a little bit more to Denali. Denali is a little bit hard on Grayson, so he kind of keeps it under control. So you see the power that Bolts gets from Denali. Bolts goes over, and these social alliances are so important in pack structure. And so Bolts goes over to Denali, and he gets a little bit more confidence. Then he pulls up a threat display and it kind of deals with it, because Denali's the old timer. He was an adult. He was kind of, you know, by default higher ranking. And so then Axel can't get anywhere with Denali. Then he's going to posture and do the same thing to Grayson. But Grayson's not going to take it lying down, does a chin rest on top of Axel there. And, you know, just a chin rest is another kind of a passive form of dominance. So that's all ramped up by the pack leader, sorry, lack of pack leader. Nobody really kind of in charge. So Axel, free reign, nobody running the show. He's going to kind of push his limits a little bit. If we had a pack leader, a true pack leader of a dominant pair, and maybe Axel will be that, I'm not really sure. But the reality is, this kind of stuff would be, this posturing would be a little bit more subdued. So they're running up the fence line there. That's always an indication. This back part of the exhibit, we live in northern Minnesota, so we are in a very high density area for wolves. And so because we fed Wednesday night, we've got the smell of deer carcass around, we've got ravens, we've got eagles. All of those things are indications for scavengers. Wolves can be scavengers in the wild. They can come close to town and make some, you know, inference, or just by the fact that there was evidence of a, you know, a kill site, they may come around. It's not uncommon for older wolves to hang around town, people's dumpsters. That's one of the things we always try to communicate through the wolf helpline is, don't leave out dog food, don't leave out, you know, garbage, because you have bear issues, you have wolf issues, you have things coming close to town and humans that we don't want to encourage. So that's something that we kind of always talk about. So the question is, can we send these images via email or link on the website? Actually, I will just send them as part of the archive. So again, to talk about Tony's, and I'm going to write down that question, Tony, dire wolf hybridization with gray wolves. I've got some information that I'll try to share as well, what we believe to be some of the migration of wolves to the new world, and some information that we can have. So yeah, we're very, again, we there's another question here. If domestic dogs being distinct from the gray wolves often discussed, is this the same case with the dingo? Tony, I've got a list of things I need to find for you. I was just reading some information about the dingo is again believed to be a dog that is just kind of a domesticated dog that had gone feral, is what the belief is. So I will send you that publication, Tony. I was just reading about that the other day. So I want to make sure I stay on task so I don't run everybody an hour and a half like I did last week. Sorry about that. But I will find that information and I'll send it as well with information on dire wolf genetics. So here we have the most common, another question, the most common wolf in North America. Boy, if you look at populations, and I'm going to go back to our website for a second, and if I look at populations, again, we have a place on our website about wolves of the world, and if I look at populations in a glance, again, I can select different locations. Roughly, Alaska currently has the estimated populations, and again, you know, this, if you know about science, that wolves don't stand there and allow you to line up and count them, you know, 1 through 8,000. You have what do we call indirect indices, you know, tracks, howling surveys. Many folks in Wisconsin, that's how wolf research first started, was looking for scat, looking, you know, doing howling surveys, conducting howling surveys, getting estimates. We have radio collared wolves that have more details about where animals range, looking at, you know, specifics about, okay, these 5 wolves use this much territory, this is the kind of habitat, let's extrapolate to that. Everywhere we see wolf sign, and we give you an estimate about wolf populations. So Alaska typically has 8 to 11,000 in the lower contiguous states. Again, 5,500, the belief here, maybe around 3,000 here in Minnesota. And Minnesota wolves have always been here. They've not been extirpated from this range. They have always been part of this range here in North America, in Minnesota. So Canada, obviously populations in Canada, if I look at again, regions, you know, looking at subspecies, the Arctic population is not as plentiful because obviously as you get farther into areas that have less biodiversity, less distribution of food available, populations might have larger territories. So you might have an Arctic wolf who might have 800 to 1,000 square miles versus a wolf that might be somewhere, let's say, in the Rocky Mountain region, you know, around Yellowstone, that has plentiful food resources. Might have, you know, bison, might have moose, might have mule deer, might have white-tailed deer. You know, we certainly have a lot more food availability, and you can't forget beaver as a secondary part of the wolf's diet. So size of territories kind of range. So obviously, probably we would say in North America, the Canadian, Alaskan populations. And the other thing I think is really important is wildlands, from that standpoint of having space for wolves to live. I think you cannot talk about wolf populations unless you talk about habitat and space availability. One thing I wanted to say, and I wanted to say this for Tony and some of the other people that are asking about questions about wolf populations across the world. The Wolf Center does sponsor a symposium. It had previously been every 5 years, and now we're going to actually have it a little bit earlier this time. We've kind of saved the date for the Wolf Symposium to be October 13th to the 16th, 2022. And one thing I would suggest, and there should be a link on our site, and I apologize, I do not spend as much time as I should on our wolf site, but I believe that there's a link on our site where you can ask us questions. One thing I would say is if you have specific questions about wolves across the globe you want to know about, type in those questions and say, hey, I'd love to have somebody at the 2022 Wolf Symposium address, wolves in Africa, wolves in war-torn, areas of Iraq or of Afghanistan. Bring those questions forward to the committee working on the symposium. And the greatest thing I think that this symposium does is allows opportunities and biologists to not only come to the United States, but also, as we saw with Dr. Jala just a few weeks ago now on the 14th of March, where we can coordinate a webinar and have the ability for those biologists to bring their messages forward. So with that said, I think that's kind of the main thing I wanted to share. So if you want to go to our website at wolf.org, if you want to check on, again, Wolf Info, Wolves of the World, and see what information is available in Canada, Europe, Asia, and Africa, but also, again, feel free to share questions with us, and we'll try to see if we can get that information shared. So the other thing I like to do is download papers when I do have opportunities to look at information and read. And so whenever possible, you know, there are a lot of sources where you can get information and see what's the latest science information. So here we are, morning ritual with the pack. This is the morning meds. And so we're seeing less and less competition, although take a look at Axel here. Again, I think I said, if you want to ID a wolf, he's got his tail up in the air and his face in everybody else's business, and it's white. It is probably Axel causing that kind of activity there. So morning meds typically for us, there's no pharmaceuticals given here. Denali was on an antihistamine for a bit because he has a real small mast cell growth, similar to what Aiden had. And Aiden, again, we will talk more about him if you want to join us for his webinar. April 27th is Denali and Aiden's birthday. We will be talking a little bit about Aiden, who passed away from complications with mast cell tumors in August of this year. But we took Denali off of the antihistamine because the antihistamines, those are mast cells or histamine-based cells. We took him off the antihistamine here just less than probably 2 weeks ago because we wanted to see how his body was dealing with that without the antihistamines. We have a medical exam. Again, we're waiting to see how this whole stay-at-home vet clinic closed kind of process goes. But we are slated to do a medical exam on this entire pack. Our USDA animal welfare permit requires us to do complete medical exams with blood work at the outset every 3 years. We obviously do it sooner if we have medical needs like we do with Luna or we did with Aiden. But for Denali, we took him off antihistamines because we wanted to see that if his body was responding, was keeping those mast cell growths in check just because of the antihistamines, or if his body was able to deal with them. And so we do feel, based on our experience with Aiden, that if they do grow, we have the ability to get them under check again by doing antihistamines. But the problem was he hates capsules. So these guys smell something, they just avoid it. So we were getting to the point where he was negatively being conditioned to meds. He wouldn't take anything from us, no matter what. You put it in butter, you put it in, I mean, my gosh, these guys were, getting, they had a little buffet table to try to figure out what he would take as far as his meds. You could not mask the smell of those antihistamines without him having issues with them. So we took him off because we, in case there is something that comes out of those medical exams and he does need a more advanced treatment, we couldn't have him negatively conditioned to meds. So that's why we kind of did that and took him off. And so right now we are dealing with that. So there's a question here. Does the staff have to worry about what odors they bring in with them? Yeah, certainly we want to make sure that we have those abilities to monitor what we're bringing into the lab for obviously other humans. And so the 4 people that are on restrictive for the wolves are also asked to not hang out in a lot of other places, which obviously the governor has asked that as of midnight tonight. But the biggest concern that I have is the kennel cough is actually a bigger concern for me right now. Obviously, as we said, the canine coronavirus is not the same as COVID-19. COVID-19 is a novel, a new virus, and this is not something that is a concern of transmission. But we're always concerned about things. We are most concerned when we get to pups and parvovirus, because parvovirus is a much hardier virus. Even than corona is very problematic for dogs, and so we're very, very restrictive. So when we get pups, we don't allow people to come in unless they've been cleaned, quarantined, and as a matter of fact, we do bleaches of the shoes with chlorine bleach, but we also do 409 because again, parvo is one of those that's not always just bleach killed. So Tony brings up a great point. I wanted to I referenced the Mexican wolves before. The Brookfield Zoo, and right here in Minnesota, the Wildlife Science Center, who's working with us for the 2020 pups, has Mexican wolves. And I did see on the Wildlife Science Center, if you're in Minnesota and you're looking for something to do before, the 14-day stay-at-home order comes into play, and you know, Peg down at the Science Center, they have outdoor viewing. They can maintain social distancing. They have a great opportunity not to just look at the Mexican wolves there, but they also participated on a study on hybridization of wolves and coyotes. And so they actually have true coy wolves, 50-50 coy wolves, and have been doing some great genetic work there. So if you get a chance to head down to the Wildlife Science Center in Stacy, again, check them out at wildlifesciencecenter.org to get information about their hours and their facility. Check them out online. I'm going to share a link with that in the archive so that you can see that as well. So, if it was allowed, would a Mexican wolf integrate with a mixed pack like this? A Mexican wolf is a Mexican wolf or is a gray wolf, and so we already have mixed subspecies. So, as I said, the subspecies variation is more about probably geography and habitat and physical adaptations of the body, not necessarily behavioral. But we would never bring a Mexican wolf in. First and foremost, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants Mexican wolves, as well as red wolves, to be candidates for release. So that means either genetically breeding or, you know, offspring being released, etc. They do not want a wolf that trusts people. You do not want a wolf that is socialized to people in the natural environment. We manage a socialized exhibit because these three subspecies are not release candidates. We're not a breeding facility. We would not, again, be in a circumstance of ever releasing. That's not our mission. That's not who we are. Again, our wolves are human centered, and so that's kind of how we want to maintain it. So we would never be bringing in a Mexican wolf. And a lot of people would question, you know, we're monitored by the Animal Welfare Act. A lot of people would question, you know, a Mexican wolf who has a physical capability of dissipating heat and long ears and long legs. Why would we bring him to northern Minnesota when we have 8 months of snow and ice? Would be a question. So another question, outside of deer, what are the wolves at the center fed? We do buy beaver. We have a local beaver trapped for the, what we call a depredation program. Meaning that beaver that flood roads are taken out, and we buy them from trappers or from government trappers. But we also have beaver that are also still trapped for fur, although not nearly as many. The price of beaver fur has gone down significantly. So we usually buy anywhere from 200 to 200, maybe even 300 in a pup year beaver that we have available to us as a secondary food supply. We also buy commercial chicken from a local grocery store. We have also buy some pork and ground beef. The retired wolves, especially Gryzor, has, because as I mentioned, has some teeth issues. We want to make sure that he has the ability to eat something soft palate diet. So that's what we do feed. Can I wrap the camera motor with a soundproofing foam to cut down on the sound? You know, I haven't. I'd have to talk to the people who installed it. Is it a problem? Is the sound a problem for you from the standpoint of viewing? Let me know. But at this point, the wolves are conditioned to it. It doesn't bother them. I need to actually get them conditioned to noise. The reality is noise is all around us. So one of the things that we discovered, our wolves are not big fans of trucks that back up with a beeping sound. Well, anybody who knows safety knows that almost every truck that is commercial now has a beeping sound. So we have discovered that we will be needing for our 2020 pups to include that in the socialization process, meaning if we get the opportunity, you know, when the garbage truck comes in, we'll make sure that we have something exciting for those new pups. So every time they hear the garbage truck, maybe they get a pig's ear, or, I mean, obviously I got to be a little more creative than that, but we want to have novel stimuli to be rewarded with something that is so exciting that the stimuli becomes less and less problematic for them. So that's something that we're working on. Besides Gryzor, who is the oldest wolf there, is a question that I had. That would be this boy, Denali, who's on screen. He is going to be 12 on April 27th. So Shannon has a question. Hi, Shannon, who is one of our wolf care members, who is now off-site because we are, again, for the animals care, we're restricting it to just 4 wolf care staff here, primarily because if somebody gets sick here, we didn't want to have all 16 people in wolf care in the same space and then have all of us get sick. So we've got our 4 people, and we're all being respectful. I basically go from the wolf center to home, and then the home to the wolf center, and that's kind of what I do. And so I'm not going anywhere else. So I'm keeping it clean for everybody here. So Shannon, let me get to your question. I've seen Gryzor climbing out of the den once this winter when I was doing wolf care with Leanne one day. It was a steep incline with the snow level and the narrow entrance. Hard to get him in and out. So they said they tried to chop away the ice for the entrance. I agree. I also think, Shannon, that there's a lot of work here for wolf care to do, but I also think, Shannon, my preference is one of the reasons why I'm okay with letting that snow build up in front of that east side den is I'd rather he slept in the transition area myself. I don't want to have a circumstance where he's kind of going in that east side den. And so if it builds up, and it's a great den for summer, because the reality is our wolves are more, I'm worried more about our older animals in 85-degree July heat and humidity than I ever am with cold. These animals are northern adapted animals, and I really worry about heat stress far more than I do about cold, especially since I can give in the cold, I can give them a good bed of hay. So again, just a reminder, please type questions in the Q&A. Raising the hand is not something I want to, it's a different screen, and so I'm already challenging my brain to be able to watch wolves, move cameras, answer questions, and not fall out of my chair. So please type the questions in, and I'll try to address them as I can. So there's another question. Will you do any research into how the water for the wolves you get from the city of Ely and the fluoride in it affecting the health of the wolves, since it's not a chemical they get in the wild? Yeah, so certainly I'm not saying that there's a situation. Our water from the city of Ely comes from Burnside, but it was just something that was a thought. Do we have a circumstance, we always want to be aware of our water. Just to reiterate, there are other facilities that have well water that have cancer. Cancer isn't something new to the Wolf Center. Cancer is something that a lot of facilities deal with. And as I talk to the vets, cancer is part of the life of canids. Other reasons why, again, autoimmune is one of those things that we talk about. It seems to me, the worst cancer cases I've had have been in the pack leaders. And so we talk about autoimmune being stress induced. And there's been some studies in Yellowstone about cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, being much higher in the pack leaders than they are in the lower ranking pack members. And so it makes me really kind of wonder, Gryzor being a perfect example. Gryzor never led anything. Gryzor wasn't capable of leading anything, or I shouldn't say capable. Gryzor didn't want leadership. His sister did. So here's Gryzor, oldest wolf we've ever managed here, having really no health issues. Here's Denali, lower ranking pack member, also didn't want leadership. Living to be 12, still hanging in the exhibit pack. Here's our pack leaders that have had cancer, that have had some extreme cases of cancer. Shadow, our pack leader. Lucas, our pack leader. Aiden, our pack leader. Luna, our pack leader. So again, I'm more interested in cortisone and stress hormones than I am in, I think, environmental conditions. If it were environmental conditions, then everybody would be dealing with it. And clearly that's not the case, because Gryzor is having no issues. So I want to reiterate, and I also want to reiterate this from someone who has autoimmune disorders. This is the biggest concern with COVID-19, why this is so risky, because people with compromised immune systems are higher at risk. And so I always want to make sure that people are respectful, even though it may be something that may not be impacting you personally because you're healthy and fit and young. There are other people who are not. And I think I really want to make sure that people recognize that. And that's something even in animal care we talk about is, what's the circumstance of that wolf? Is that wolf under stress? Obviously, I'm more worried about Bolts. Bolts has got a lot more stress around here because of Axel's posturing towards him. So is that stress going to cause some issues? I mean, I still don't know why the boy does not have higher vocals when he howls. So we need to be able to figure that out. So another question here, will there be a female in the set of pups? Yes, that is a priority for us. We need a female here to get that dominant pair, because two wolves showing leadership role are going to be important, much more than one wolf showing leadership role. So that's something that we want to kind of deal with. So another question earlier this morning, it looked like Grayson was doing some appeasement and submissive behavior to Denali. Yes, I believe, I call it the love hormone. That's probably not the scientific term, but prolactin hormone is here. Whether it's daylight triggered, temperature triggered, I kind of think temperature, because we have circumstances here when we get cold again in the morning, and I bet when they get snow this weekend, we're going to ramp up something. But when it's warm and sunny, everybody seems just happy. Bolts the other day, before he ate, he was pouncing up and down, throwing stuff in the air. He takes his meds, he throws them up in the air. That's clearly, to me, an indication of, again, that changing dynamic of the hormones. So another question here, Etta Meyer heard your comment about needing a female to calm things down. She's wondering, would the two pups coming from this summer possibly both be females, or will it be only one female and one male, so the females don't compete? That is a correct response. I thought briefly about two females, and then in a conference call with Peg Callahan, who is providing us the pup source this year, again, she reminded me about the competition issues with females. In captivity, especially, they can be harsh on each other, and the female dominance, and while I understand it, again, in the wild, theoretically, when resources are tight, only one female reproduces to carry pups, and that female reproducing is going to control other females. You guys can go ahead and do meds and start going. So that female, that is the dominant female, could be super aggressive on those lower ranking females to prevent overpopulation, to prevent more than one litter from being reproduced. Now, granted, Yellowstone, I believe early on had some science. I think the Druid pack was the reference to that pack, but there was some evidence of 3 or 4 litters being reproduced. Again, it depends on food resource availability. I mean, the resource availability in Yellowstone is much greater than it is here in Minnesota. Typically, 1 litter reproduces, and obviously in survival, maybe not even half of those are going to survive. So the idea of female competition is inherent in the wild for reproductive control, and it seems to be an overwhelming response in captivity. And so we, for a brief moment, I thought 2 females, and we've done 2 females before, but I also had to separate 2 females. 1989, I had Raisa and Basha. By the time they were 6 months of age, they were struggling so much and dominating each so much. We ended up providing a different facility, a place for Raisa. We selected Basha to stay with the exhibit. And again, that was in 1989 when the center did not have a larger enclosure. It was a very small enclosure. So I think sometime viewing stress was creating some of that redirected behavior. So there's a question here. I'd love to see more Instagram stories or live sessions from the center. Yes, we are in the process of hiring someone who's kind of a marketing video link person. Obviously, with the current pandemic, some of our hiring's been slowed down a bit, but I think that's a great place to go. I am an old PAC member. I started in 1989, so actually started working with wolves in 1986. So I don't even have an Instagram account. So I'm hoping that the center, again, looks to replacing me with younger PAC members who have that ability. And that's obviously one of my big goals is I want to make sure that whoever socializes with these 2012 pups are going to be 2020 pups, sorry. I lost 2 decades there. But whoever socializes with the 2020 pups is going to be healthy enough and be here when they're 16 years old and have an end of life issue. So I'm going to be looking for that as we get into the pups and trying to phase myself out of the social bonding. I do not want those pups bonded with me as the, as a lead curator, and then find, when they're old, that I'm not available. I got to be always of the mindset of what's best for the pups and who's going to be that next person to take that pup from the exhibit all the way through retirement. So all of our wolves have microchips. Rowan had asked, will the new pups have microchips? Yes, that's standard protocol for us. That is actually USDA protocol. If there is ever an escape, which we've not had, we want to obviously be able to verify the individual that is, captured if it was ever escaped. We do have protocols like that. That is the most important part of our kind of protocol. So another question from Amy is, Axel the most aggressive wolf? And again, aggression is a tough term. He's the most dominant, but you know what? The reality is he is so hormonally driven. I don't know, and I would like to do some, once we get back to some normalcy, we just recently started working with a lab here in town about doing some sampling, and we can do some saliva swab sampling for cortisol, for other types of hormones. I think Axel is just a little bit different. He's always been that way as a pup. He's a little bit more excited. He gets a little bit more ramped up, but he's not really the most confident. He's most dominant. And aggression is something, again, dominance is part of ritualized order. Aggression is like more of a term that I use in ethology when you're kind of pushing things, you're being a little bit more kind of proactive to be able to get your point, and that does speak to some behaviors of Axel, but overall I think every wolf is different. I mean, that's kind of the nature of how a pack works, is everybody has a different role, different circumstance, etc. So Debbie says, could you do antihistamines injections instead of capsules? Oh gosh, no. First of all, we're not certain that the antihistamines are, fear avoidance on injecting animals is a real concern for me. We do vaccines once a year. This antihistamines would be something given, every day. I can't even imagine injection for a wolf every day without having fear avoidance. These are not dogs by any means, and even some dog owners I know who deal with some chronic cases of diabetes struggle with injections. So we'll work on that. It's not an issue actually right now. That lump that he had has not grown in a year and a half, and so it's certainly a circumstance that we're monitoring. But we'll take a deeper look at that later and try to come up with it. So again, the camera sound doesn't bother people from a viewing experience. That's good. Like I said, we'll continue the circumstance of trying to manage the pups as best as we can to be able to identify, what's the best kind of experiences or stimuli that they need to be exposed to. I'm going to just turn on my mic a little bit. That snow is pretty crusty there. I'm picking up kind of a lot of back feed there. So Tony asked, why are there no Asian or European subspecies? Why only North America? I guess a part of my issue with transport is permitting is such a kind of a lengthy process, as well as the transport of animals for long distances are a real concern for me. It's not that I don't work with people in Europe. I have some really great contacts and some, I'm really certainly interested in that biology, but I would say I would rather support the facilities that are working with subspecies within their geographic range. Again, I believe that there are people that can do things better than I can, and I think the risk of stress of transport to pups is not worth the educational opportunities that would be available to them. And I also think, again, permitting diseases. I mean, certainly as we get into this world of pandemic, we now are talking about travel and the influence of native diseases, things that are, uh, not natural in our environment, and how that works from the standpoint of having immunities, et cetera. So one thing I want to point out here is that we have wolf care staff, and you notice that when the wolf care staff are working, they're not engaging socially with the wolves. They're not talking to them. They're not interacting with them, especially the scat bucket. The scat bucket is one of those tools that we use to try to get new people to integrate into the pen. So we don't want to just have people walk right in and say, hey, wolves, here's a brand new human. So we use the scat bucket, and we condition the pups when they're extremely young to be able to recognize cutoff signals. And so the scat bucket is a tool we're instructing of people whenever they have the scat bucket, they don't talk to the wolf, they don't look at the wolf, they don't make any social engagement. And you can see that the wolves respect it. Axel's chomping at the bit. He wants to engage. He's walking behind him. He was yawning, showing a little bit of stress. He wants to interact because that's Axel. He wants everything now. Axel is definitely patience. If patience was a virtue, and again, I don't know if wolves have the same virtues. That's called anthropomorphism, when you say that, a human trait is implied to an animal. But whatever it is in the wolf world that says, I need to wait, Axel doesn't have it. So Grayson's walking a little bit more respectful distance behind, again, waiting for the wolf care staff to be done with their job and be able to, make some, interactions, but they're respectful. Leanne walks by with a scat bucket, he steps back and gives a wide berth. That's important to us. And so when we do pup care, we have a lot of people involved in the pup care. People have to be able to follow the protocol. I can't reiterate that enough. Protocol is key for us, that everybody does everything the same. If some person decides that they want to play with the wolf pups when they have the scat bucket in their hand, that makes it confusing for the wolves, and then inconsistency will mean that they will test things over and over again, and that's an issue. So the question is, how is Axel planning to take over since he hasn't been in the pack as long as Bulch or Denali? Well, one thing I think that's really important is the distinction between dominance and domineering is different. And so Axel can take leadership because it's not about age, it's not about size. Anybody who owns a poodle next to a big old husky can tell you that sometimes poodles can rule the world. And Judy Hunter, if you're watching, I do recognize that. So the reality is that attitude is one part of it. You got to be willingly want to be a leader. So Denali and Aiden, when they were young, Aiden clearly wanted to be the leader, but that wasn't the only part of it. Maya, the female that was with Aiden, she was bonded to Shadow, and they were pair bonded. And then after Shadow was retired, Maya seemed to select Aiden. Same thing with Shadow, who selected Maya over Disa, who was a little bit more dominant in our history. And if you want to follow our whole history and you've got a lot of time in your hands, you can log into our website. And at the Den Store, I put together a video called Highlights of the Ambassador Wolves, and it shows everything from 1989 on to 2018 to give you an idea. But the idea of that pack leadership is attitude, support, and alliances, and pair bonding between male and female. So Axel does not seem to have as many alliances. He's down here rolling over for staff. He's actually giving staff a little bit of grief. That's something that the staff are working on. He's kind of excited, so kind of because we're not obviously spending as much time. And so that's a little challenge for us. We don't want the wolves jumping on us. That's testing behavior. And so we want to make sure that we manage that. That's something that's a drawback of having less time in wolf care. The wolves are used to having a routine, and when you change the routine, it makes for excitement. Excitement makes for testing. And so we want to make sure that the wolf care staff are safe. And that's why you always see two people in doing wolf care. But the alliances between individual wolves will help determine leadership. And so Axel, again, being that kind of excited, doesn't necessarily have as much alliances. Grayson, a little bit more timid, but as someone referenced earlier, they're starting to see him approach the other wolves, lick under the chin, what we call rub under chin, greeting, appeasement behavior. He's much more inclined to have social alliances, and that's really a big part of leadership in the future. So we'll kind of watch that as it comes forward and see how that happens. So again, the question: do you wear protective gear, adjust your body language when you interact with the wolves, or do they interact with them just as you would a domestic dog? That's a very good question. Yes, we are very cognizant of the idea that socialized wolves are not dogs. Reiterate that over and over again. Socialized wolves, they still have the skeletal structure, they still have the brain capacity. As a matter of fact, I think it's very, very important, and this is a challenge that we have. People will see the wolves greet. They'll see the wolves lick people's faces, and they say, oh, they're just like dogs, I want to get them. No, greeting by licking of the face is a wolf trait. Licking of the face is something that wolf pups do to their parents to get them to regurgitate meat. It is appeasement behavior. It's a greeting behavior. It's something that wolves do to greet. It's something that dogs do to greet. And again, it's a greeting behavior. But wolves are also animals who test for rank. And so when we socialize the wolves, we take away their fear of people, we integrate humans into the social structure, we're inviting those behaviors. But as you can see, wolf behavior is not all social. Wolf behavior can be predatory. Wolf behavior can be testing. Wolf behavior can be dominance. Those are things that are part of the wolf behavior. And when you open up that social network, you expect all of those. So one thing I tell the wolf care staff, I do not want you down on your knees, in kneeling with the wolves. I want, again, because if you get down on their level, first of all, we're tall. Human dynamics by height gives us more assertion of dominance, because wolves use direct eye contact. So staring straight eye to eye contact is a dominance kind of communication. So the stare is very, very important. And so when we work with the wolves, our height gives us a little bit of authority, but that axle testing and jumping is a concern. That's a byproduct, I think, of again, a little bit of a change that's happened, and we've got to address that. We want to make sure that that is something that is not conditioned. We don't, encourage them to jump up on us. Now, one of the qualifications I want to make is that every facility does things differently. I'm not saying that it's not okay. Other facilities do that, and that's fine. It's just that's not how we choose to manage. And there's nothing wrong with different facilities managing different ways and having different protocols. It's just our preference. Keep in mind, our facility, we deal with an environmental hazard called ice. And if a wolf is jumping on us and we slip and fall, it can encourage the wolf to go from a social breeding to a predatory breeding in a short period of time. So we have to be mindful of what is our risk assessment of our exhibit. Like I said, this is an ice ball. I mean, we, short of the little outfits, we're in the ice capades here. And that's challenging for wolf care staff just to basically walk without having a wolf decide to get excited and jump on you. And it's only Axel who's really kind of doing that right now. So that's something that's kind of a priority. So again, back to the water situation. Could you put a well on the property? That's a possibility, but again, we always look at risk assessment and where we have expenditures. Whether well water is groundwater, and so that's circumstance where we want to make sure that. First of all, I don't have a belief. Again, I only referenced it just because that's what you do, is you look at all variables. I only referenced the water question because, that's a variable. But by the fact that other wolves don't have it, again, usually you can rule out environmental variables. So I do not think the expense of a well is as, important of a priority that we have right now. Certainly, though, expense-wise, because we do pay septic on water places inside the enclosure, so there might be something in the future if the price of water gets higher, and certainly that's a common thing for all of us to discuss. So another question: outside of birds and the occasional squirrel, what kind of animals get into the enclosure, and how do the wolves interact with them? Well, we had a fisher who climbed the trees. They jumped, hopped from tree to tree, probably decided it wasn't the best move for them, and they exited it above the trees. So anything like martins, fishers, you know, they're actually hunting the same squirrels that the wolves are, so they might be present. We did get a fox that went underneath the fence several years ago, actually the 1993 wolves, Mackenzie, Lakota, Kiana, and Lucas were the wolves that dealt with that, and they killed it. It did not last. It went in after a carcass, and they went after it, and it did not survive. Other than that, mink, which is unusual because they're usually water species. I don't know why it was a spring time. I don't know how it got this close, although in northern Minnesota, we do have a good maintenance of our original wetlands. I think we're in St. Louis County and Cooch County. I think we're 90% of our original wetlands are still intact, so it's not under the question. So there's a question from Amy: can wolves get COVID-19? The current science coming from the CDC is no. The canine coronavirus is different. The COVID-19 virus is unique. I talked about that, I believe, in the first Free Friday. I'll send that link again for people to watch, but obviously the CDC is the source of information that I get. There was some question about a dog who had evidence of coronavirus or COVID-19, and that was the new virus, but they believe it was just because it was in the ambient environment of the human that was impacted. And so I think obviously the CDC is going to keep research on that, so I'll send some links when I do the archive for that. So question related to stress: do you think that Luna's drooling at the pups and then at Aiden's body when he died a sign of stress for her? Actually, I don't know about stress, but it was certainly probably an adrenal gland influence. I'm going to step just back for a minute and turn off a mic. The ravens have invaded the facility, so I'm going to turn off a mic to reduce the raven sound for a second. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm in an episode of Alfred Hitchcock around here. So the question, again, sorry, I'm old and I forgot what I was talking about. About the coronavirus, COVID-19. Yeah, I'll send you some links on that. I just think it's important to keep up. Zoonotics is what we call it. Zoonotics is when a disease is carried by an animal, it can be transmitted to a human. That's just good health for us to always be aware of exposure, you know, what our animals are exposed to, and what obviously new viruses. And that goes back to this idea of Tony's question about bringing in an animal from another area that does not have the natural environment. Antibodies, we call that invasives in the term of natural resources, so we're always concerned about that. So we would not ever likely maintain that, not to mention the logistical I don't want to call it nightmare, I guess I said the word nightmare, but the logistical permitting issues are something that we're concerned about. So another question: which male has the highest chance of becoming the next dominant? It's not something that we can predict. Pack structure is always about alliances, so it depends on how these next pups come in, who spends the most time with them. If you go back to our footage on our highlights DVD, we show some clips about the wolves that spent the time with those pups. Obviously, if you take the time to bond with those pups instead of chasing them around and poking them with a 4-leg stab, which Denali did to Grayson, you're going to see alliances. So Grayson and Denali don't get along very well because, let's face it, Denali wasn't very nice to him when he came in. He was investigating, but not socially engaging, whereas Aiden was laying on his side, letting Grayson, sleep with him, and always kind of standing near him and giving him a lot of body language and a lot of social alliances. That's what these pack members do. These are social carnivores, and that's kind of how they are. So will you be doing these kind of webinars more frequently? Right now, I manage 15 webinars for the center as a kind of a program revenue for the wolf care department. So we have a subscription every January where we have these kind of wolf care webinars. So again, in 2020, I do 15 of them. They are also available for single view as a price. So again, as a revenue source for the wolf care department, we do those. But these free ones we're doing for the period of time when the Wolf Center is closed. So every Friday between now and May 1st, I will be doing these. I also teach at a local college. So starting Monday, I start my first online classes. So I am going to be just being able to just manage the webinars that I have for the center programs, as well as these free ones, as well as teaching is about all I can manage, as well as Axel. So that might be something that maybe in the future, I'm hoping to retire from the college in May. Maybe we can do that. I think one of the things that we may be doing as well that may be different than the structure of the webinar is that we are entering a contract with explore.org. Once we lose the snow and ice, you know, maybe July-ish, we'll be putting those cameras up. No, I'm just kidding. We should be by May, although it's not feeling like it. But we'll be putting those explore.org cameras up. And then they have asked us to have like just informal chats, not as lengthy as this one, but, you know, maybe, you know, a couple times a week, just logging into a camera and saying, hey, this is what's going on, as part of that explore.org contract. So I'd see that being as an opportunity to be able to do more. I talk too much, and I know that. So I'm hoping those will be done by other wolf care staff that could be a little bit less wordy. So in my opinion, experience to the exhibit wolf view wolf care members. Well, this is a question that we have been asking forever. Do they think we're another wolf? Or do we think we're a pack member? Do we think, do they know we're humans? I have no way of knowing what they think. I do know that they read body language. And I have experience with that with handlers. If people show nervousness, they can pick up on that. So I do know that when we stare down a wolf, we can initiate a challenge, you know, so they do communicate with us. So they read body language. So to some extent, and I think it was Conrad Lorenz who wrote about this early on and said, you know, at best we think that there maybe see us as a social companion, but not as a pack mate. Again, there are people who work with wolves all over the world who do things differently. I know Sean Ellis in the UK had done some work where he actually was on a carcass with the wolves, kind of teaching them how to feed. We don't do that here. I remember the first time Nisa saw a deer. Nisa was a female pup that we had in 2004. And she'd been all cuddly, and, you know, everybody's like, oh, look at the Princess Nisa, look at the pretty little puppy. And she was all cuddly. And we walked by a deer in a wheelbarrow, and we just decided to set her down in the wheelbarrow by the deer. And oh my gosh, she ripped into that deer leg, and we tried to pick her up and move her off the deer leg. And she went into a threat display, food possession. We didn't teach her that. Up to that point, she'd been on a bottle and being fed gruel. But the minute she saw a deer leg, she became food possessive and food defense. And that's the best way to describe instinct for us. So I think that's important for people to recognize that, you know, we have an opportunity here to educate about what wolf behavior is. But we always have to recognize that captivity makes that behavior altered. I think the human component doing wolf care changes some of the excitement. It makes for competition. It makes for, you know, the more dominant animals rushing towards you, wanting to get greeted, and then they get excited. The subordinates, as you saw after Axel jumped on Kelly, Bolts came over and did a little bit of a posturing about it, and then that posturing created them to redirect to Bolts. That's because of the humans in there. So we have to take care of them. But we have to also make sure that the pack is its social unit. That's our goal. So obviously with Gryzor, our biggest challenge is he's alone. So we are his social unit. Wonderful job there on the, I just went to the exhibit pack there. Wonderful job getting that snow out of there. But we're his social unit. Now, the other thing also, he's going to be 16 on May 5th. And right now, Gryzor's social unit is a nap. So no similar to my dog who's 15, who says, "Oh, do I have to walk again?" We get her up for walks 4 times a day to keep her just moving. But let me tell you, between those walks, she's sleeping, and so that's important for us. So I'm going to wrap up here because I already went way over. Will live chat be a possibility? Again, I think once that explore.org comes into play, live chat may be something that happens. I'm not really sure how that's going to be structured. So another question, how do you know who the scat belongs to? To eat well enough? Well, obviously, if we start see white scat, then we're going to pay attention to the cameras. We can go to the surveillance camera and see who defecated where. Obviously, not always the cameras will be on, but that point. But we do have 9 surveillance cameras here, and so we only broadcast one view. And when explore.org comes back online, we'll have 2 more. So that gives us an opportunity to be able to see those a little bit farther. Anyways, what insight can you learn from wolves or apply it to our own dogs? I think there's some great work on that. I think the reality is understanding, to me, with dogs, understanding predatory behavior is really, really important. Understanding what stimulates it. I think one of the things that people forget is that, you know, especially young children running, you know, flailing their arms, you know, they're low to the ground, so they're the same eye level with dogs. I think a lot of times people forget that the stimuli of predatory behavior can be driven by sight, by sound, by motion. So I think that's one of the biggest messages I always want to make sure. I feel bad for a lot of dogs who are misunderstood because people don't recognize their language. They try to put human terms on the dogs, and they try to put the dog in a human world. And when a dog acts like a dog, they're oftentimes discarded because they don't understand them. So I think that's a big message that I'd like to have. And so there's Gryzor. I'm going to kind of wrap up here because I guess I'll leave it at that. I can stay online. I've got a lot of things to do, but I have no problem answering questions. I will archive this so people can watch it later if you want. But I'm going to try to wrap up the last 8 questions here and then sign off. But I would also like to welcome you again to join us for our regular scheduled webinars. Our next one is not going to be until April 27th. That'll be Denali's birthday. And we'll also be talking about Aiden's, who passed away from cancer in August 2019. And we'll be talking about his circumstance. But if you want to join us then, we currently do have all males in the exhibit. Luna was our last female. I would, again, hope to have more information about the 2020 pups and how we're going to proceed with that. There's a couple of questions about that I want to wrap up with here. But I think if you want to share with me questions that you want to make sure I address, and I didn't address them here, please always email me at curator@wolf.org. I would rather that people ask those questions. I apologize if I skipped over a question that someone asked. Again, I'm managing the camera. I'm trying to watch for the wolves, trying to read the questions and try not to stutter and you know, through questions. So meaning that I don't want to you know, make sure I'm coherent, that you can understand what I'm saying. So I want to kind of address those. So last kind of questions here. Do we have to make sure not to wear any outer clothes made of leather or fluffy things during wolf care? That includes boots. Well, we try to condition them to respect us, but yeah, I don't wear my moose hide mucklucks in there. I certainly, I find Axel gives me grief when I wear flannel. He likes the feel of flannel. He tends to like to grab it, but we do have polar fleece coats. Ann Raspberry, one of our wolf care staff, graciously donated polar fleece coats to all of the wolf care staff. So you'll see that as protocol. We do try to wear the same clothes, and we try to leave the clothes here so that they don't go out into the community. And obviously, like I said, kennel cough is one of our biggest contagious issues for animals, so that nobody's near a dog. Their coats just stay right here in the lab, and that's a standard protocol for us. So last question. Well, 2 questions. What kind of college degree should you get for this job? Well, not that I'm teaching or I'm trying to make a plug for Vermilion, but Vermilion Community College here in Ely does have a natural resource technology degree. NRT 2-year tech degree is all we ask for the standpoint of animals handlers. They also have a fish and wildlife degree that's kind of more of a transfer degree. I like the NRT degree because it does have forestry in it as well. And a majority of our management of our facility is about tree management. because we want cover, we want habitat, and I hate to say it, but boy, the wild populations, we have to understand forest management is a huge part of wildlife management. So it's important for me to have both of those degrees. Vet tech is also something we do at the college. So that's a great thing. But again, I want to know that the people who work here understand the ecology of wolves in the wild, because the behaviors that drive these animals are about the natural selection that occurs in the wild. How do you hunt? How do you structure a hunt? Well, time after time after time after time, you're successful at hunting, that predatory behavior becomes instinctual. I want people to understand ecology. So I want enough study of the wild, enough study of the habitat, enough study of the behavior to make that person a successful handler. So I'm going to end it with the raven question. Do ravens ever steal stuff from the wolf yard and leave found object gifts? Yes. If you come to our parking lot and you see a scapula from a deer, that is not because we in wolf care are lazy and dropped it on the way to the compost or to the dumpster. Ravens will pick things up and drop them. And I'll end this with a story of a raven. One of my colleagues, his neighbor in town fed ravens, and he's walking to his car and he had a pork chop bone dropped on his head. So ravens do carry things out of the enclosure. The challenge we have in Luna being on a diet was that when we'd feed the exhibit pack chicken breasts, lo and behold, the ravens would try to pick them up and take them. They'd be too heavy. They'd drop them into Luna's pen. So I always told our vet, yes, we have her on a diet. Yes, we weigh her food. But last week I saw her eat 3 chicken breasts and a snowshoe hare. I can't regulate that diet. So that is something that the ravens do here. Yeah, we like ravens. They are a great social species as well, and we do congregate them. So the wolves have decided that today it is time to go to bed. They're going to be sleeping. So one of the things we're going to do in this response of stay at home, we are considered essential workers, so we will be here. But what would I've asked wolf care staff to do is delay their morning wolf check from 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock so that we don't get the wolves up, because the wolves get stimulated when people show up. They get them up and then they get a little bit rammy. So I'm going to ask that we let the wolves sleep in. And granted, they'll get up on their own, but they won't be as excited as we get meds ready. So at 9 o'clock, and then by this 11 o'clock hour, they're already, it's too warm in the day for them to really be up. They've kind of already gone into a more of a crepuscular, dawn and dusk or nocturnal behavior. And so if we start wolf care at 9 and done by 11, they're sleeping by 11, that gives us a lot more downtime for the wolves when we don't have as many people available to monitor them. So that's kind of where we're at. So thank you again for joining us. I will archive this. I am working on Luna's archive right now. So basically what an archive means that I take the footage from Zoom, I download it, which takes anywhere from 40 to 50 minutes. When Zoom had first started offering a lot of our sessions across the academic community, it took me 3 days to download an archive. So Zoom is getting a lot of traffic. So once I get it downloaded, I then upload it to Adobe Premiere. I then clip it and I put it up on YouTube and I send out the YouTube link. And so that's how you'll get information. So if you're waiting on Luna, I have it downloaded from Zoom. I just am working on processing that this morning. So thank you again. And please check out information in a lot of different sources. I always say the more knowledge you have and the more places you read information, the better informed you will be. So good luck, stay safe, and I hope everybody is in a community that is, again, treating each other with respect, because that's what we need, and we wish everyone well. So see you again.